Hey, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alex Wilhelm. I'm a journalist with the News Stack. Now, today we're going deep on something very important, how data moves between the physical world and the software world. That means we're talking IT and OT, information technology on one side and operational technology on the other. Or if you prefer, the systems that run a business and the systems that run the machines and industrial processes that so many businesses depend on. So why this topic and why now? Well, simple. Historically, IT and OT were kept separate, sometimes even for good reasons. However, the modern economy demands that IT and OT systems talk to one another, no matter how they were historically siloed. And as you can imagine, this creates a bit of a tension. If you want to bring your OT data into your IT systems, you probably need more and better tooling than before. So today, what's the talk track? Well, we'll start with the basics, IT and OT data from a high level, then why the two systems were kept separate. After that, how we can better integrate them, the challenges and benefits from doing so, and how to handle any resulting risk. To help us all understand what modern companies need today from the IT and OT systems they have, I have brought two friends. On one hand, I have Jerrod Foster, a senior solutions engineer at Fortra. Jerrod, hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm excited for today's conversation. Looking forward to it.
Glad you're here. And we also have Michael Barford, a principal solutions engineer at Fortra. Michael, glad to have you here.
Likewise. Thank you, Alex, for having us.
And Fortra, in case you need a bit of a refresher, is a cybersecurity company focused on protecting the enterprise, its data, its infra, and its workflows. They've built offensive cybersecurity tools like Cobalt Strike, defensive tools like domain and phishing protection, and a host of data security tools, which is what we'll focus on today. These include Go Anywhere MFT, which you'll hear more about in just a minute. All right, now let's hand over the reins to our friends to lead the conversations. I'll ask questions as they go. And yes, we do get into a couple of use cases. Anyways, Jerrod, Michael, let's dive in by talking about what IT and OT are.
Yeah, so I can start the conversation out here. So basically, as you mentioned, IT, OT, it's the separation of the business systems, the business processes, and the actual physical processes that are involved with typically like the manufacturing industry, oil and gas, power utilities, waste and water management. And so it's the systems that are on the OT side that are actually involved with the physical instruments, the physical processes, the actual production floor. And what's all involved with basically all of the processes in the manufacturing side of what a company may be producing, for example. And like you said, historically, those environments have been very segmented, and it's a very sort of strict and typically like air-gapped environments on the OT side. But there's been more of a push for the modernization of those environments, as there's been more needs for sort of the data to be shared between IT and OT, and also with pushing the data externally to the cloud. So,
can you tell me more about why they were so historically siloed? Because it seems a little bit extreme to have them air gapped on one side, and now we need to go, kind of through that. So it just seems like a weird setup, given kind of where we've ended up.
Yeah. So the Purdue model, historically, I mean, it was developed in the early 90s, 1991, by Purdue University, actually, and so those systems and those environments, they have obviously a lot of dependency. They're mission critical environments. They require basically a availability to be basically constant, zero downtime situations. And because these environments are, they're dealing with manufacturing of goods and waste and water management. So it's highly critical systems, and so they need to function sort of separate. And there's a lot of risk with those environments if they were to have any sort of impact, or were to go down, or were to be infected by some sort of security issue, for example. So that's sort of tied in with why they were so historically segmented and rigidly and segmented, and also air gapped, historically speaking.
No, that makes sense.
I think that's a quite key point as well, is that a lot of the equipment within the OT environment is going to be very similar to what is in the IT environment. There's going to be a lot of servers, there's going to be a lot of infrastructure, which we're quite familiar with. But of course, as the OT environment is much more focused on manufacturing or typically more physical elements, there's a very good chance it may not be as up to date as the IT environment. And that important distinction was also a really key factor in why that Purdue model and why that segregation is really important.
So maybe we should talk a bit about the Purdue model and how things have been set up. I know you guys have some slides. Do you want to start with that and kind of walk people through that particular setup? There we go.
Yeah, so the Purdue model is typically seen as a kind of a 5-level structure. In this diagram here, we're focusing on 3 of the primary ones, which really bridges the gap between the IT environment, which we could see as being that level 4 and 5 area, as well as the level 3 environment, which is going to be typically the start of the OT network. It's going to be kind of the barrier or ultimately the DMZ into that sort of zone, that sort of location. And the Purdue model is fantastic because each level indicates and describes different types of tooling in place. And what's quite nice about this is that it natively adds in leveled structure, which gives additional kind of air gapping needs and air gapping requirements. So it allows controls to be in place where something within the level 3 environment, for example, wouldn't have a direct access to the very low level, where the actual robots or machines are, which are typically going to be in that level 1 environment. It's not going to allow direct access to that. It's going to step through these stages, step through these levels, and add a bit of control and structure to the actual connection itself.
So, Michael, I know that the Purdue model was actually put together back in the 90s. So it's a little bit, I want to say aged, but maybe not old. How pertinent is this today to where you think companies should be going when it comes to kind of bringing and converging their IT and OT systems? Is this where you think people should go, or is this what we're leaving behind?
So I don't necessarily think it's being left behind. I think this is kind of the de facto standard, which most organizations will kind of adhere with. I do think there has been iterations on this. So typically, actually, the DMZs themselves aren't actually described within the Purdue model. And what we've seen with many customers is within these levels, they may have sub-levels. They may have a sub-level which indicates a DMZ. So you can have a DMZ going upwards, a DMZ going downwards. And of course, you can have additional sub-levels in place. So I think this is kind of an overarching kind of standard or way to achieve it, and then organizations have iterated on that just to be able to account with the areas which they need to kind of account with, whether that's with additional segmentation or just allowing different types of tooling to connect.
But even when we have these sub levels, we're still having email at the top and machines at the very bottom of these levels.
Absolutely, yeah. The intention of this is to really separate the, I guess, some of the vulnerabilities and traditional kind of traditional access that we have within that IT world. Something which we're very reliant on with the the Internet of Things, where everything wants to be connected and speaking with everything else. It's about kind of segmenting or keeping that relatively isolated. And then sort of introducing this structure, this kind of controlled way to go down the levels as needed.
I'm glad you said IoT because, Jerrod, one of the things that I learned a lot while prepping for our talk today is just how much more data is being generated from the world of OT. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then why companies now want to make sure that it's available in their IT systems, and then we can talk about how to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the OT side, especially at the levels, sort of 0, 1, and 2, at the actual manufacturing floor, within the actual components in the think about like a manufacturing sort of assembly line with a robotic arm working on assembling like a vehicle, for example, and all the different components and devices that are involved with the assembly of a product like a vehicle. There's constant output of data, from these tools, from these systems, and that data needs to make its way outside of the sort of the segmented OT network levels 0, 1, and 2, for example, to make its way up to the cloud environment, to the edge environments, into ERP systems, into data lake environments for analytical sort of processing, for the business side to make decisions on sort of predictive analysis on what could be improved upon, operational efficiency, if there's any issues with throughput on the production floor, on the assembly line, depending on what their industry is. And then also on the financial side, so seeing how they can make improvements also to increase productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So and I guess on the analytical side, the systems that they're using and the applications they're using for that analysis, it's able to ingest and analyze that data in a lot faster scale and pace than previously sort of necessarily needed in the past. And so as Michael was stating, that the Purdue model has been adapted and modernized in a sense to sort of converge the environments in a way that allows for the quicker sort of output of that information to these applications, to these systems for the business side to make these decisions and be able to improve efficiency, et cetera, and also improve output, and also predict for potential issues with different components, and for sort of the forecasting side of it as well.
Just to get a little bit more granular, how much data are we talking about needing to be moved, and how big are the files in question? Are we talking about the need to move a lot of very tiny files from the OT world into the IT world, or could these be relatively large blocks of data that therefore need to have pretty robust pipelines to get them where they're going?
I think it's a combination of both, really. I would say the majority of it is smaller files. So typically when we look at scenarios where this is going to be relevant, is bringing things like logs from that OT network up to the IT environment to then be processed is a very key one. But vice versa, it could be a case of bringing down software into that OT network with things like maybe updater files or patch files or something like that, and they can obviously vary quite drastically in size, but a lot of equipment within the OT world itself, the OT world has got a lot of similarities to the IT world. A lot of the equipment's going to be running things like operating systems, so things like Windows or Linux. There's going to be tooling within that environment which is going to potentially have quite large sizes. If you're looking at things like ISOs, for example, they could be a few gigabytes. So it definitely is a combination, but I think as of now, at least, it doesn't seem like we're looking at the massive data feeds just yet within that OT world. Of course, there are going to be some exceptions, but I'd say the majority of it is going to be sort of small to slightly larger sized documents.
So from OT to IT, smaller files, lots of them. From IT to OT, thinking about software updates, Michael, we're thinking about larger files, but less frequently.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a big generalization, but that's definitely kind of the trends which we're definitely seeing here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, when I look at this, it seems to be a pretty secure setup. What are the issues with the Purdue model that some companies might be running into today that they need to then rectify?
So I'd say the biggest challenge is having governance and control over that process. Traditionally, we've seen quite a few customers actually manage the movement of data using physical media. So things like USB sticks, or things like moving hard drives themselves around. And there's a huge initiative to move away from that. There's been introductions in the past of some dangerous software being introduced, and that medium, as it's started to kind of come down a little bit, some organizations or some companies are kind of adhering to this Purdue model. They don't actually have a networking route from their OT network to the IT or vice versa. So actually getting something implemented and something set up in order to securely move this data whilst having that kind of overview of what's happening is definitely a kind of an area of focus for quite a few right now.
Just thinking out loud, you probably can't have good latency and clean file transfers and good security and encryption if you're carrying mission critical data on a USB stick. Am I wrong there, or am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think the latency would definitely be pretty bad. You'd definitely be looking at a few minutes to hours to days to months to get something moved.
Yeah, what if the factory was here and the IT setup was here? You had to carry it across. I mean, that seems incredibly archaic. Is that a common situation, or is that something that you're using as a more extreme example to show that some people are still very far behind? It
does seem quite severe. Does seem like a very severe example, but one thing which I think is always important to remember with these OT environments is a lot of them are quite, without lack of a better word, they're quite old. A lot of these environments have been deployed and set up decades ago, especially when you're looking at things like robotic machinery and kind of factories and things like that. A lot of that equipment is bought to last. It's bought to last a very, very long time. And if you're looking just 5 years ago in the IT world, you're looking at kind of legacy, whereas in the OT world, 5 years is typically quite a small portion of time. In fact, I've been working with an oil and gas organization quite recently, and they're just in the process of actually spinning up a brand new rig. And some of the equipment that they're looking for, some of the contracts they've got with their third-party suppliers are lasting 40 years. So
40 years.
It gives a stark comparison on sort of what these guys are looking to achieve and sort of what they're looking to deploy. And I mean, who knows what the world's going to look like in 40 years' time, right?
Well, 40 years ago was 1986, which was, I mean, dear Lord, was that word perfect era back in the day? I mean, that is an incredible time frame. Okay, so we have a mix of companies in their preparedness. Now, I know that some companies have a file transfer setup put in place. So is there kind of a spectrum of companies from the USB stick users on one side and then the more modern companies? What does it look like if you're in the middle of that progression? You've made some progress.
Yeah, so one example, I was working with a electric utility company, and their use case involved, I guess, or their motivation for reaching out and looking to, kind of modernize beyond what they currently were performing to converge their IT/OT networks. So they were, still leveraging SMB between their different network layers within their sort of adapted Purdue model. And they were trying to get away from leveraging SMB, as there can be some potential vulnerabilities or potential security risks with using SMB within the environments, and then basically leveraging different domain controllers in different zones and different accounts that were segmented within the various zones, moving data across, basically copying a file from this share to the other share that they could then log into a different domain controller in a different zone with a different account to then pull the file back into the other zone. But with that process, even though they had more sort of flexibility than having to physically, travel to a site, to a location with a USB stick, they still had gaps in visibility to who was moving what data and where and when, and also limitation on protocol and automation then as well. I mean, and if they did have some automation in place, it was a lot of disparate sort of, maybe potential scripts that were being leveraged, and a lack of visibility basically across what was being performed and how to manage that between those different layers and zones as well. And that poses some also challenges from an administrative standpoint when those layers are very siloed, just because the IT/OT side may not really talk to each other from a business and actual human sort of standpoint. And so when you have disparate tooling across those different layers and different segmentation, then there's a lot of gaps in visibility in terms of what each side is using, and then the data that's flowing between those zones and those segments as well. So looking to kind of move beyond that with a centralized sort of tool, and that allowed for flexibility and different protocols, and then a full audit trail of what's being moved, by who and when, and then being able to automate as well.
Jerrod, how common is it to see a company that has a method built to handle file transfer in this way, but is using a relatively brittle old system, old scripts, FTP, whatever, that they've kind of cobbled together? Is that the norm in the market today?
Yeah, I would say it's a pretty common place for companies to be at within their sort of IT/OT modernization or convergence, journey, if you will. It's definitely not uncommon. I think that's sort of like becomes the first sort of iteration and approach is to look to script it or code it to a degree themselves, and then that quickly kind of gets out of hand in the sense that it becomes very challenging to administer, because then you have a lot of different third-party libraries and these different processes. People leave companies that basically scripted or defined a process early on, and people have to come in and adopt that, and they have a challenge of being able to pick it up where others left off, and so you have that sort of support issue as well. But I would say it's pretty common. That's a common scenario and a common sort of place that companies are in, that we typically sort of, I guess, meet with them when they're at that place.
No, that makes good sense. Okay, so we have historically distinct IT/OT worlds. People want to converge them. They may have some tools in place for this, or they may be all the way back to using USB sticks to carry information back and forth. They need auditability. They need it to be low latency, and they need it to be something that can persist even after institutional knowledge in the form of humans walk out the door. Okay, so let's talk about how to fix all of this. And Fortra, I know, has an MFT solution. So why don't we start with breaking down what it offers, and then we can talk about kind of where it plugs those individual gaps. Michael, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the MFT product which we offer. So that's a managed file transfer solution. And the key for that is really in the name. It's a product designed specifically to aid and help companies with moving, well, not just files, actually. It's to help them with moving files and data. And I think one of the beauties of a product like this is that it's very much designed to integrate with many, many different protocols, whether that is your modern kind of secure encryption protocols, or even those legacy protocols, which could potentially still be in operation within the OT environment. Of course, we would always recommend moving away from legacy, things like legacy FTP, but sometimes it's not going to be an option. Some tooling or some script out there which was created 20 years ago, unfortunately, is so important for the organization that as soon as you try and make a change, it ruins or breaks everything. So we still want to kind of allow connection into those tools, but we kind of want to put on this governance layer or this control layer on top of it, which is what the MFT itself actually provides, which does support modern authentication. It supports those modern encryption protocols, and you can interface with that, making use of much more secure transfer processes and flows. And I think the biggest value that managed file transfer or MFT can really give an organization is kind of providing this holistic overview of many different file transfer processes and scenarios. So rather than just having a one-to-one transfer relationship and saying, there we go, we've got a process in place, it can work with many different scenarios in parallel. It can set up huge numbers of routines. All of these could be kind of automated in some fashion, so to remove that human element. But kind of have this central platform to actually get that orchestrated, get that administered and set up.
So it doesn't just help you with moving information around in a safe and secure fashion. It also gives you kind of a map of where all your information is and where it's flowing.
It gives administrators, for example, direct access to being able to see many different transfer scenarios and processes, so they can orchestrate and set up all these different routines, which can point into numerous different servers, numerous different file stores and data stores, but all accessed from this one central location.
I was trying to avoid any buzzwords, but you said orchestration, so we'll go for it. Is this in some ways also kind of an orchestration layer on top of people's OT systems to help them integrate with IT?
Absolutely, yeah. I think orchestration and automation is a huge part of a solution like this, and really helps with reliability. And I think what's also quite key is it also helps with troubleshooting. So when things do go wrong, you can put in place processes which try and recover from that. You can try and recover and resume as necessary. So it gives a bit more resiliency to transactions and processes.
All right, Jerrod, can you tell me about automation and repeatability here? Because one thing that I think is clearly a problem with the USB stick world, that's one-to-one, you have to do it each time. I presume that your solution has a way to set up file transfers that are recurring and safe while they do that?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, there's the ability to obviously set up scheduled processes that obviously are defined on a certain cadence with some more advanced, conditional scheduling can be built in as well, and then the ability to monitor and watch for files. So situations where we don't know exactly when a device or like a component may be outputting data, and we can watch for that and grab it in sort of near real time to then help it flow up from the lower levels on the sort of the environment up to the IT space, IT world. So there's that automation component of the application, but additionally, because there will be a need for still some ad hoc file movements, especially when we're dealing with sort of the maintenance and patching of the OSs and the devices and the components, controllers, etc., more on the OT side, there's still a need, for the ad hoc movement of files. And so a solution like GoAnywhere not only has the automation ability with the built-in scheduling, the ability to monitor and watch for files, to trigger off of certain events, but also for providing different options from a protocol perspective for admins to move data, from the IT side down to the OT side in a secure manner in order for maintenance purposes as well. And then just to touch on another point from earlier where we were discussing, so there's been a sort of an adaptation of the Purdue model that most companies are following. It's not exactly as strict as it previously was in order to deal with sort of the modern requirements of how data needs to be utilized on the business side. And one additional benefit of a solution like GoAnywhere is our ability to be flexible in terms of how we deploy the application in a secure manner, being able to facilitate a deployment that would satisfy security requirements where you have multiple DMZs in different zones, and still being different DMZ and sort of the micro segmentation that's leveraged, even if it's a little bit flattened, rather than when compared to the historical Purdue model. So
can you tell me when or an example of a company that might need multiple different DMZs and why? That's a very interesting point, but I'm curious to know more about it.
Yeah, so we have sort of the traditional DMZ between the IT OT side, showing in the slide here, the levels 4 and 5 between the level 3, and oftentimes the DMZ will be like a level 3.5. But then we often see an additional DMZ or multiple different DMZs from different environment segments that could be for a specific business process or business unit. And then if there's an additional DMZ in that location, we have a DMZ solution that we could deploy basically in that zone or in those zones that provide then an access point for that user group, for that business process, without having to necessarily deploy a whole separate instance of the application itself. So providing that secure sort of access point across the different micro segments as needed. And that's kind of where we see that. It depends on the business process, but yeah.
I appreciate that. Michael, thinking a lot about keeping things secure and so forth. I'm curious what part regulations around the world play into this, and the kind of the more strict rules it seems that companies are being forced to deal with. So can you tell me about why an MFT service is a good fit for companies that are dealing with perhaps even complicated IT/OT setups, but also region-specific regulations?
Yeah, so a lot of the kind of the requirement for integrating these two environments is actually being pushed from regulation and controls and things like that. I think it's fair to say that the geopolitical climate is it's very different to what it once was.
Yes.
There's a big impact, or there's a big stress on ensuring that critical national infrastructure, which pretty much most of which will have its own OT network, its own OT environment, is becoming a target of attacks. Right, modern warfare is often making use of much more kind of cyber elements than what it did in the past. We actually saw that with the annexation of Crimea about 10 years ago now, where one of the big impacts for the region was malware, which took out the energy grid for them, and it kind of crippled the environment. So I guess as a response to that, many governments, many government entities are actually putting in place their own regulations to kind of enforce that. There is, of course, strict controls, but then also enforcing that there's appropriate logging, appropriate information which can be used to help kind of understand what's going on within these environments, which are typically, because they're typically air gapped, they're typically a little bit more invisible than what organizations are familiar with in the IT world. So, I mean, speaking regionally, so you might have guessed from the accent, I'm from the UK, but we've got an act which got established a couple of years ago in 2024 called the Cyber Resilience Act. And one of the requirements of that, this act specifically targeted critical national infrastructure, but one of the requirements of that is to ensure that we have proper auditing and controls in place to be able to understand what's happening with those environments, which then ultimately makes it a little bit quicker to rebuild. And I think that trend is something which is going to governments across the globe are already enacting very similar types of regulations, which
I was going to say, like, the EU probably has something similar. The US is going to want to move in the same direction. So it seems that this is going to be a thing, this necessary auditing trails for how information is moved and then how you can record it and share that information. That's going to be a pan-global issue, Michael.
Yeah, I think what's actually quite interesting is this isn't just necessarily regulations that directly impact organizations that have OT environments, but there's a lot more regulation around how organizations handle their third-party suppliers. So in the EU, quite recently, the DORA Act has come into play, which impacts every financial institution across the EU. And one of the requirements of that is to ensure that they've got due diligence and process in place for how they deal with their third-party suppliers. So, even though they may not necessarily, these third-party suppliers may not necessarily fall under the remit of DORA directly, because they may associate or collaborate with financial institutions, they do have to follow some level of regulation off the back of that. So, yeah, I think it's definitely an area which is seemingly becoming more constrictive in a way, but ultimately trying to make it so that everyone's kind of accountable for what's happening with their processes and, of course, the products and services they offer.
Jerrod, can you just give us kind of a thumbnail about the regulatory environment in the US as it relates to what we were just discussing in the EU and UK?
Yeah, so there's sort of parallel or similar regulations that are going to impact the third-party vendors, for example, and just the overall industries that those companies are operating within. So we see that obviously with power and utilities, as well as in the energy sector, especially if we're dealing with anything that's nuclear related. Also with anything tied to the Department of Defense or defense contractors and defense manufacturing. So there's, for example, CMMC or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification as an example. And then there's also the Federal Systems Acquisition Supply Chain Security Act, and amongst many others. But those regulations are only going to continue to be evolve and change and become, more strict over time within these areas, as Michael was discussing. Since historically those the lower level OT environment, 0 through 2, for example, have traditionally been air gapped and are historically sort of outdated and haven't had to worry about external outside threats. And so malicious actors are aware of this sort of dated infrastructure in OT tooling, and so it's become a target. But as the convergence of the IT/OT world is taking place, there's a need to obviously tighten up security, and the regulations will be, kind of catching up with that and evolving over time, as the OT environments are, often involved with sort of national security in a sense, right? And especially when you're dealing with water and waste management and municipalities and being able to provide water to communities. And so it's a very real world situation if there's a security compromise and security issue with an OT environment in those situations.
Okay, but not every company is, protecting our water and electricity supply. And in the modern era, we have a lot of great tools that let people build software quickly. We call it vibe coding. So, Jerrod, why shouldn't a company just go out and vibe code their own version of this and call it a day?
Yeah, great question. So,
tongue in cheek, in case the sarcasm wasn't clear. We were just talking about the importance of regulation and auditability, but I do think it's worth asking because I know someone's thinking it.
Yeah, obviously there's a shortcut to developing sort of an automation process and streamlining processes with the sort of the involvement in the rise of AI vibe coding. But with that, you're opening the door for obviously the security risks that could be involved with leveraging code that maybe you don't fully understand, and leveraging libraries that could be involving security vulnerabilities, for example, and opening yourself up and exposing yourself to different threats, and obviously then potentially breaching compliance as well. So there's a whole sort of slew of potential issues with that process if you don't really know what you're working with, and relying upon AI to make those decisions for you and develop that for you, those processes for you.
Okay. Michael, going back over to you, I'm curious about not introducing new risks, because I think building or buying a solution that's managed and helps you kind of handle this all very good. But how can we ensure during that process that we're minimizing the introduction of new vectors of attack on the OT network through the IT network?
So sticking with that purging model, I think, is actually quite critical, and that's something which is quite important with the tooling we provide here at Fortra, is that the tooling is designed to fit into that. We're not going to deploy something and then just open up access across everything. It's going to be very much a deploy stage, following the kind of the level structure, and ensuring that you've got these kind of stop points. Of course, I think it's one of the biggest risks from the IT world into the OT world is malware, affecting the systems themselves. So having scanning in place, anti-malware scanning on the documentation before it even starts the journey is going to be very, very critical. And what's really nice about the solutions which we can offer is they can actually do multiple scans at different points. So we can scan it towards the level 4 layer, or we could allow the transfer to go through, do another scan on the level 3, so on and so forth. It's also quite critical that we're not typically opening up full access to just an administrator either, right? We don't want the administrator to kind of be able to bypass these routes and these processes. So there's a very, very strict kind of RBAC controls in place, which can be set up to segment the environment and ensure that you've got those controlled connections in play as well. Essentially, in order to kind of stick with, to minimize the actual risk that the IT world has into the OT environment, I think it is kind of going with the classic, and it's kind of sticking with the company's existing deployment infrastructure, having very similar controls in play. If they've got different domains on each level, for example, sort of marrying and working with that. But I guess the value is to put in place tooling which can make it easier for the administrators kind of orchestrate that flow, as to actually establish that transfer and flow, but then also automating that process as well, so that we remove that human in the middle kind of element. We're removing that vulnerability in and of itself, something which can't bypass process, which can't bypass procedure. We can have this automated routine to run through the flows as well.
So that all makes good sense, so long as the service is available. So what does a company need from an MFT service in terms of uptime, and what can you guys promise today?
So as we discussed previously, the availability of these environments is often quite high, and requirements are quite high for the SLA standpoint. 5 nines in some situations, very very low downtime, minimal downtime. So being able to operate within their SLAs from a failover perspective, as well as a DR strategy, and be able to function within that, be able to help them in meet those SLAs from not only a file transfer perspective, but also from an uptime perspective as well.
All right, so we've talked about where people are today, what's broken, what they need, and then what Fortra MFT can bring to them and how it can solve those problems. I'm curious about the implementation side of this. If a company comes to you guys and says, hey, we know we're a little bit behind, we have to get our act together here, how long does it take from that early conversation to having their system kind of in place on average? Let's say, I know every account is different, but what's a normal timeline like?
It absolutely does vary quite a lot, but it usually runs through running through some sort of trial process, trial period, and kind of making use of, I guess, existing infrastructure where possible. If not, then of course, we want a new infrastructure to be deployed and actually kind of run through that trial. Normally, these projects, they do take a little bit of time. They are usually maybe a few months. But what's quite nice here at Fortra is the most of the delays, or most of the time to actually get something rolled out, is running through that, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and making sure that the solution which is being deployed does adhere with the company's own regulatory requirements. Run it through the security team, ensure it kind of meets their own internal security policies as well. But the actual software and the process for getting it started, it can be very, very quick. The actual I guess the expertise we've got available, and the way that we can help a company get this deployed, can be done within the matter of days. But typically the project itself, just due to bureaucracy and some of the stuff that brings, will normally take a few months to get something rolled out.
And then one more question about customer type. So when we think about who's buying this, is this only the largest companies, or do you see mid-size, maybe all the way down to SMBs, getting in on the game because they have the same needs and the same problems?
Yeah, I see a lot of variation and sort of a balance between very large organizations, large corporations, Fortune 100, 500, et cetera, all the way down to the mid-size, and then
Sure.
occasionally even the smaller company sizes, kind of even dealing with more like a mom and pop type company as well. But
That's small. I'm surprised, Jerrod. I didn't think that they would have enough necessary file transfers to require this, but tell me why.
Yeah, maybe not so much necessarily in like the IT OT space per se, but in general in terms of our customer base and the need for managed file transfer in general. They're, even if you're a smaller size company, you're still needed to trade files and be able to manage that and do that securely. And then you're dealing with trading partners that you're having to comply with how they require you to transfer those files. And so then you're looking to leverage a solution that you can utilize in order to meet those requirements in order to trade with those larger organizations typically as well.
Well, now my curiosity is piqued. Michael, same situation over in the UK and Europe. Are you seeing even relatively small companies sign up for MFT?
Yeah, so it's I would definitely say mid-market and enterprise are kind of the biggest users of a solution like this. But absolutely, I mean, as Jerrod mentioned, that even mom and pop shops, they still have to connect with their trading partners. Data movement is kind of the lifeblood of pretty much every organization out there. And I think one thing which is quite valuable with a product like this is it can be a bit of a time save, because especially in those smaller businesses, a lot of stuff is done ad hoc, or it's a lot of stuff is done in-house, right? They kind of create their own custom scripts and custom processes. And oftentimes, you talked a bit on vibe coding a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of times, somebody has to manage that. Somebody has to maintain that vibe coded piece of that vibe coded script or piece of software, and that's sometimes not going to be a very quick process. If you need to make changes to it, if it does go out of date, if it does no longer adhere with modern security standards, it can
ever
take a long.
adhered to modern security standards to begin with, Michael. You're giving it too much credit. Look, I'm a vibe coder. I should not make anything that goes into a secure system. Let's be totally honest.
Yeah. Trust but verify, right? Always really want to be verifying everything to do with vibe coded kind of scripting. But it can be a very manual task. Oftentimes, I think it's quite a common story that companies who do look to deploy MFT, typically it kind of comes from a place of they've needed to make changes, and they've realized just how big and mountainous of a job it actually is. And they want to kind of future-proof themselves from that going forward. So it's very, very common story. And that can absolutely affect the smaller businesses as well.
All right, I got one more thing I want to talk about before I let you guys go, and it's a little bit off topic, but not entirely. So everyone's been talking about AI ad nauseum for a couple of years now, and one thing that I was thinking about is people want to be able to bring all their kind of proprietary corporate information into their AI context. So how much does that demand create more need for MFT, as people probably want to ingest their OT data as well into their in-house AI setup? And Michael, I'm curious what you have to say.
Yeah, I think big data is it's the year of big data. Everybody wants to be doing data analytics in some fashion, and I think it's we're in a very good position where with cloud computing, it's very easy to access very, very big and performant data stores as well to actually be able to kind of run through these processes. I've not personally seen the need for OT information to be fed into AI models just yet.
Really?
I've not. I don't think it's been a huge topic right now, but I think it definitely is an area where organizations want to understand what's happening with the OT network, the OT environment, and where AI can fit into that. It absolutely could do analytical kind of reporting and data like that. But even just plugging that data into something like a SIEM, where they can control, they can provide their own custom dashboarding to get and of course alerting and processes to get an understanding of what's going on there. I think that absolutely could be of value. But that's kind of the extent that I've seen with regards to kind of the integration myself.
Jerrod, I'm curious, have you seen any of that demand, or am I entirely talking about the future that may be further out than I thought?
I would say one use case that comes to mind is with in the auto industry and some of the self-driving sort of technology that's in that space, with the LiDAR data, for example, and the sensors that they use for the self-driving functionality within those vehicles, and the need to get that data from the vehicles basically up to the IT environment for analysis to obviously improve those systems. And there's a lot of LLMs that are being leveraged for the analysis of that, the self-driving data within those vehicles. So that's a sort of newer example of a sort of a more modern like OT example with the self-driving cars than what we traditionally think of with the OT production sort of manufacturing use cases and industries. We see that.
All right. Well, guys, I think that just about covers the entire setup. Is there anything that we missed? But I think we've gone through needs, solutions, fixes, and markets. Did I forget anything important?
I think we did a pretty good job of covering all the different topics we wanted to get through today. I guess to summarize in terms of the managed file transfer use case and functionality and sort of the problem it's solving within the OT IT convergence requirements there is, I guess, just to kind of summarize that is the not allowing sort of direct access from IT OT networks, and then being able to automate or provide ad hoc functionality and protocols for data movement, data encryption in transit, at rest, the ability to scan files as it traverses the different zones to secure the data, and also to provide the sort of data validity and the data guarantee between those zones as well for delivery and proof of delivery, with the auditing and role-based access of the file transfers of the admin accounts in order for to adhere to security requirements, and then also for the different compliance regulations within those that are required by those companies that they're operating within those industries.
Rock and roll. Now, if people want to learn more, they have questions, where should they go, and then who should they email?
So definitely head to the goanywhere.com website. We've got some really, really good material on there. We've got some fantastic write-ups around, traditional OT industries like oil and energy, but even for organizations which aren't, which do operate their own OT environment, but aren't part of the traditional set. We've got some very good write-ups on there, very good use cases, very good general information. And I guess when it comes to emailing, please, absolutely, you feel free to contact myself. It's michael.barford@fortra.com. Likewise for my colleague, Jerrod as well.
Yeah, and then just to add to that, so on our Fortra, company website, you have the ability for any of our solutions, even outside of Gonium MFT, we have the option, to request a demo directly within the different areas of the website. If you're watching a pre-recorded demo of the application, you can request a demo there and request a free trial of the application. Then, as Michael mentioned, you can contact me as well at jerrod.foster@fortra.com. So lots of different options there. But yeah, feel free to take a look at it, the Fortra site, and also take a look at some of the other cybersecurity solutions that we also have under our sort of portfolio family of solutions too.
All right. Well, thank you guys both very much. Everyone, Fortra.com, go take a look. Jerrod, Michael, you're the best. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the conversation this morning.
Thank you very much.